And so, since we were talking about Moses and got into Moses, I decided to stick with Moses just a little bit more and provide you with some material to give some more, to recap his life. You find that he was a very interesting guy. The Lord used him, selected him to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt, and there's so many things he did. When you get into the scriptures and you begin to read in the Old Testament, you're reading the first 5 books of the Bible, and you start reading things about Moses and his impact. He had a tremendous thumbprint in the scriptures. And this past couple of weeks, I've been listening through Leviticus. Now, Leviticus, as you well know, is one of those places where you better be good and awake when you start reading or listening to it. Don't be in the reclined position, because you're liable to wake up at the end of whatever you was listening to. However, I've been captivated by the instruction that was given to Moses and how important he was. Because just think about it. All the communications he was receiving, God is relating to him directly. He's having a conversation with him. He's giving him instruction. He's just pouring things into him that he's relating to the people. And then if you search the name Moses, obviously it's a lot in the Old Testament there, but his name shows up 727 times in scriptures. So he had a tremendous impact in the scriptures. When we look at, and then this past week, someone used this text was in chapel, was talking about the road to Emmaus. And then when you get down to Luke chapter 24, it reads, if you remember, Jesus was walking with them. They didn't know who it was. And then it says, then beginning with Moses and with all the prophets, he explained to them the things written about himself in all the scriptures. So beginning with Moses, I would say he's an important fellow to study. He's an important guy to read about. Regardless of the mistakes, the flaws, God used him. And he was an integral part, a powerful part of how we have the first 5 books of the Old Testament, because they were written by him. And of course, there's a name for that, the Pentateuch. And then the instructions. You can't forget this. Before we get into this handout I've given you.
Exodus 2.
That's all right. If you want to read that rather than hear me, that's okay. Just let me know next time. The Mount of Transfiguration. Who shows up on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus? Moses and Elijah. Important guy. I think we need to slow down and read and just kind of study him a little bit. Well, I'll give you some handouts. Let's turn to those. Moses, and of course, this handout is nothing I typed up. It came out of the Lexham Bible Dictionary, and so that's where all this material came from. And I thought they'd done a good job with it. Moses, the name means born or is born. That's the Egyptian. He who is drawn from water. And as we read the name, or drawn out, if you will, and I think in the scriptures, I think it bears out to mean drawn out. Even though it's an Egyptian name, it's interesting that name was never changed. He did get he did have a a Hebrew identity as a basis, but that name never got changed. The Egyptian name didn't get changed. And so he kept that from then on. I guess you could say he drew out the children of Israel from out of Egypt. He had a brother named Aaron, who was the high priest, and Miriam. And of course, you can read there, he was the leader of the Hebrew people in the 13th century BC, chosen by God to lead the people from Egypt to Canaan. And he speaks face to face as one speaks to a friend, Exodus 33:11. He receives the law of God on Mount Sinai and builds a tabernacle according to God's instruction. Moses acts as an intermediary between God and the people for 40 years, but dies before entering the promised land. So we see here Moses in the Torah, looking at the pre-Exodus years. Here he has been born, he leaves Egypt, he goes to Midian. He's 80 years old at the time that he is given the commission to go back to Egypt. And of course he was born in Egypt during the time of the slavery, the captivity that they had there in Egypt. His biological parents are Amram and Jochebed. They're from the tribe of Levi. And of course you know that he had Miriam and Aaron as older siblings. When we look at the scriptures and follow the scriptures out, here are some highlights that you see in Exodus 1. Pharaoh gives a decree demanding that every newborn son to be thrown into the Nile. And then Jochebed, she hides him for 3 months, places him in a reed basket that's been covered with pitch, and places him in the Nile. Then Pharaoh's daughter discovers the infant, pities him, and then Miriam is somewhere close by. She makes a suggestion, and then they hire Jochebed to nurse her own child. That had to be God. There's no other way that could have taken place. Can you imagine the trepidation of going through? It's behind his heel. The trepidation of taking your baby and putting it into an ark, a mini ark, if you will, and setting it out. I cannot imagine releasing a child in a basket and just to see. God would have to be leading and directing them. As you read on here, she picks him up, Pharaoh's daughter picks him up, names him Moses, saying, because I drew him out of water. In the Egyptian language, Moses means is born. And then later on in life, we see that it goes quickly to where it jumps. There in your chapter 2, you're reading about all this, and now by the time you get to verses 11 to 12 of chapter 2, Moses kills an Egyptian for beating a Hebrew, then hides the body in the sand. And then we know how that was discovered, how that was pointed out. Two Hebrews were fussing, if you recall, arguing. And then he decides to intervene. Then all of a sudden, are you going to kill us like you did that other? So he flees to Midian. And Moses there, we see what happens at the place of drawing water, where he intervenes, and Jethro's daughters were being harassed at the well, and he intervened there. Then he marries Jethro's daughter, Zipporah, and then she gives birth to his sons in Gershom and Eleazar. Now, if you're looking at that, you can see they're just in chapter 2. That's a lot of time being jumped over. A lot of stuff was jumped over by the time they get through chapter 2 there. And there's a lot of information that's taking place. Anyway, Then it's time to go back to Egypt, and where we got into a wonderful discussion for the past 2 weeks out of Exodus chapter 4. God commissions him. Imagine in chapter 3, I like that, how the signals of change in Moses' life. He sees the angel of God in a burning bush. That's what they say. I don't know if it's the angel of God or if it was I'm trying to think of the proper term, but either way, it was what's that term? The theological term?
Theophany?
Theophany. There you go. Thank you. Theophany of God. You get a star, Pam. You be sure he gets one.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd rather have chocolate.
Okay. We'll see what we can do. So he sees this burning bush, and God is beginning to reveal himself to Moses, and it causes us to pause and to think about our own life and God's working in our own life, because we're not far removed from the way God speaks and acts in our lives. Events happen and we realize, was that God? Is this a God moment? Sitting in a pew, hearing the gospel, for me personally, sitting in a pew, hearing the gospel message being proclaimed, you realize you're a sinner. You realize there's something taking place. You realize that I need to repent of my sins. A God moment. People come to salvation. And then as you come to salvation, God does things and he orders the events of our lives. God's very much in control. He's speaking. If we can only listen, or if we can only be aware enough to see that he's speaking, or that he's using this event or this moment. And then there's times whenever, just like when Moses was tending to the flocks, and all of a sudden, to him, I'm just doing the duties that I've left Egypt, reared in, I don't know if it was luxury, but I would say it would be luxury compared to what the Hebrews were living in. And now I'm out here in the wilderness, and I'm taking care of these sheep. And then all of a sudden, he's doing the mundane, and then God intervenes. Something happens. I think he was being set up, and I love it when God takes time for us to set us up for a moment, for when he's going to do something in our lives, speak something into our lives, but not just so that we hold it, but that we turn around and use it or share it, or it's a part of our path moving forward. I remember when I was a kid, I knew enough to know nothing. But as a kid, you think you grasp what you see, what the world is in front of you. When I grew up, I thought, I want to have a Cadillac. I want to have a Cadillac. Dad had bought me a 1963, I believe it was, Cadillac. One of the big things, and I would play with that thing. And the other thing was, as I was beginning to grow old, I remember playing that in the back of the car, while no seat belts, up there in the car, whatever it was, all the way down to Florida to visit Uncle Chuck and Aunt Lee, and he was on an aircraft carrier down there in the Navy. And so I'm playing with that, enjoyed that. As time goes on, I remember the next thing that seemed to pop into my mind was, I want to be a doctor. I'm going to be a doctor when I grow up. For whatever reason, I got infatuated with that. And then at the age of, I think 6 or 7, maybe older than that. Yeah, somewhere around there. We had just got home from Wednesday night church service, and a phone call came through. We had already put on our pajamas for the night. Mom was doing something in the kitchen. The phone rings, and my cousin was with this lady, and this was about 3 miles down the road, who was friends of the family. Anyway, she was pregnant, and the men had gone somewhere to something. Dad was with them, his cousins, and then that lady was not related. And so anyway, she's about to give birth. My cousin's calling, I don't know what to do. What should I do? So we went and jumped in that 1964 Ford with I think it had a Police Interceptor motor in it. It had a 390 in it, but it would roll. So we busted down there and Mom is a very cautious driver, has always been. I believe that thing left the ground a few times when we got in Gastonia, one in time in particular. But anyway, we go and pick them up. Nolan's over here, my older brother. Nathan and Angela is in between them and Mom. And guess who gets stuck in the back with that pregnant lady? You guessed it. It was me. And so she's over here and I'm sitting right here. And before we could get off of 85 on Cox Road to go up to, see it's burning the brain, to go up to Gaston Memorial Hospital, she let out a scream because of the pain. My brother was turning around facing her, and how he knew this, I don't know. He said, breathe. He was doing that, you know, on his knees talking to her. And I thought, I hope it works, whatever he's telling her. And,
How old were you?
I think I was about 6 or 7, I think. And she lets out a scream, and her hand comes, reaches over and grabs my arm, and I'm screaming. And Mom was saying, don't you give birth, don't you give birth. You hold it, you hold it. And so, and then at that time, before they straightened the road out, it went like this. Mom, she had that thing floored going up there. And we went airborne. I feel certain we did. And so we pulled up, she pulled up the front, you kids get out, go into the hospital. So Nolan, myself, and Angela and Nathan, we go up there in our pajamas. Nolan didn't have his pajamas on, but we go in and just sit in the front of the hospital. Mom whips around back. They get that lady out. She's on a gurney and has that baby on the way in, on that gurney. I do not want to be a doctor anymore. That left me completely. And then from then on, I don't know what am I going to be now? It impacted me in such a way that it shook it out of me, I guess. Not that it was a bad thing, but I reflected on that. And then other times as you're going through life, by the time I got 11 years old, I remember going to Grandma's house one day, and we was coming in, as in the summer, Mom took us down to visit Grandma. She lived about 4 miles down the road from the house. And I come bebopping in the house. My younger siblings had already gone in. And I come through the door, and when I stepped in the door, Grandma, it's like something hit her. She goes, "You're going to be a preacher." And I said, "Okay. Is anything in the kitchen?" And so you have these events, and there's more things that happen. There's other things that take place in our lives, and we all have those moments. And like Moses, there in front of the burning bush, you don't see that kind of thing every day. In fact, I don't know if anybody's ever seen it, period. It's not recorded anywhere. So God has a way of speaking and using and influencing our lives, using small events that changes our path, to orchestrate our steps. And then we read in scriptures as we begin to realize God's got his hand on us and he's directing each and every one of us. Not one of us is beyond his vision, beyond his guiding hand. And so he's guiding us. And so we see here that they're going back to Egypt. He sees the burning bush. Time is passing. I don't know exactly how much time there was between that and when his commission and going back. Just a few verses when we look at Scripture. But anyway, and then with chapter 4, verse 24 through 26, we read the past 2 weeks how that when he was on his way, God shows up in the middle of the night to either kill him or kill his son because the son had not been circumcised. We don't know which for sure. We have convincing opinions on both sides of that. But anyway, but then God, that circumcision, it delays their response to what had happened. And sometimes our responses to God not only delays, but also cancels out something that could have happened. Have you ever been in a spot or something and you realize, I can't do this. This is not for me. I don't feel right. I'm in the wrong spot. I need to remove myself of this.
How old was this child at that time, do we know?
We don't know.
He'd been there 40 years, right?
Yeah.
When and why were Marion and Aaron upset because he had married?
Zipporah.
Zipporah. Good question.
Was that after he got back to?
Yeah, it'd have to be after he got back to Egypt. Because there's,
John Hagee addressed that.
yeah,
Zipporah was a dark-skinned woman. And Hagee said it was probably the first case of racism because the Jewish people were instructed to be fairly nationalistic. They didn't marry the Egyptians. They didn't have anything to do with them that way. But when Moses married outside of the Jewish nationality, the Jewish people, Miriam found it offensive. And when she complained to God or complained to the other people, is Moses the only one that we should listen to? Her real motive was she was angry at Moses for marrying a dark-skinned lady. And so God said, you and you and you come on in here in this tent, we're going to talk. And when Miriam complained of, God knew her heart, knew her real motive. And when she complained about the color of her skin, she came out white with leprosy. Said, you want a skin issue? There you go. And when Moses went to bat for her, God healed her.
Yeah.
And I think it's a valid argument. When I was a kid, I raised in Japan, I saw servicemen, a lot of servicemen. Most of the English-speaking people that we were around were servicemen, and Japan was flooded with them. And I saw guys marrying Japanese girls, and the kids they had were absolutely beautiful. They called them Nisei. Nisei is a half-breed. And I saw servicemen that had come from Germany and other places, and they'd have German wives and French wives and Swedish wives, Spanish wives. And that was not looked down on. But when I came to this country and started right at junior high, and it didn't show up right away, but not long after that, there were white and blacks starting to get together, and that was horrible. And I couldn't, my little mind, my young mind could not rationalize that. It's okay to marry a German girl. My German grandfather married a French girl. It's okay to marry a Japanese girl. Why is it bad to marry a black girl? And I couldn't figure that out. And it troubled me for years until as an adult I figured out it's the societal taboo that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And when you look at other countries, if you travel to other countries, and Nick, you've done this more than probably anybody in this room, you see, you go to this country and it's all Mexicans. You go to this country and it's all Germans. And you go to this country and it's all Egyptians, pretty much. And I guess it's okay, but when you come to this country, and all of us are mutts. But you look at the success of this country, you look at you look at your history and your history, and you see all the good points and all the blending of all these societies and cultures, and this is a rich, rich country. Does that make sense to anybody but me?
Melting pot.
It is the melting pot.
It's interesting, Joseph married an Egyptian woman, and yet it's through Joseph that the children of Israel are spared.
Yeah.
It's because of the favor of God on Joseph.
Yeah.
But he, of the 12 tribes, he marries an Egyptian woman.
Yeah.
Yeah. Manasseh and Ephraim. Of course, nobody was gonna speak up against him in his position. That's true. Because he was second in command.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. I haven't traveled extensively in in the world, but I remember when I went to Guyana, went to Trinidad and Tobago, and then went from there to Guyana doing missions work. And I remember observing the relationships between, and asking the question when it was convenient, do you guys experience racism here? And in Trinidad and Tobago, there was a number of people that were brown, like India. They were from India. And then you had those that were black. And I found out that it was frowned upon that when the light browns and the blacks got together, the light browns stayed with the light browns, the blacks stayed with the blacks. But yet there was this intermingling, and I never seen I wasn't there long enough to see how it played in and played out, only there a week at a time each time I went. But it was there long enough to begin to ask and to see, is there discrimination? Is there racism, things of that nature? And yeah, it was there. And it's sad to say, it's like you said, they're not of us. That's what I thought of when you was telling your story. You're not from here. You're not part of our community. You're not from us. You're not one of us. It's kind of like that question you get asked occasionally when you go to a place and somebody says, you're not from around here, are you? I've been told that several times with my drawl that I've got. But yeah, you stand out unless you are part of the community. And then, even then, there's certain things that you have to do to fit in. You stay in your area and they stay in their area. Everybody's got their own spot to stay in.
I think almost every society has their
Oh, yeah.
racism. Their things they approve of and things that they don't approve of. That's kind of human nature, I think.
Yeah.
It's hard to get past that. It's more cultural than it is anything else. Brazil, you can go from lily white to the darkest black, and everything in between. I think they're the most forgiving society there is on racism. Brazil is.
They've got a lot of immigrants in different places. You go to southern Brazil, you got that German,
There's a lot of Germans.
Italian influence down there. That's where you get that girl from Ipanema, blonde hair, blonde. But that doesn't go the whole country. You go up into Rio and you got there's more Japanese in Rio than there is in any other city except Japan. Huge Japanese influence in Rio.
Mm.
And then when you get up where Chris is, it's the black African influence, because that's where the slave trade came into Salvador, and they just went from there and just flooded, because they were used as slaves to work the big plantations. Brazil had their infestation of plantations like this country did in the south. Theirs was in the northeast where they had the big river, and still tremendous farmland up there. There's San Francisco River is the second biggest under Amazon. And the San Francisco is absolutely beautiful, clear, huge, huge river. And the farms have literally bled it out to where by the time it gets to the ocean, to the time it gets to the Atlantic Ocean, it's like the Gulf of California. There is no river. It's just a riverbed that only gets used for flooding. They milked it.
Well, I guess we could go all the way back to the Tower of Babel, when the languages were confused and they were separated. That possibly, because if you recall, God makes the comment, they have one mind. They were really connected about what they were doing. The wrong thing to do, what they were doing. There's some backstory to all that. But then you see the languages confused and they can't communicate with each other. And then they all separated.
Let me ask you another question here. I've heard it said that because of the sin of Ham with Noah, that his skin was turned black. And is that biblical?
I don't think it's biblical. Based on my research, it is we can get into that at some point. That is an old tale that I've heard when I was young, and remember hearing it for a number of years. That's where black people came from through Ham because of what he did. And also, if you recall, when the judgment came down, it came down not on Ham, it came down on Canaan. Which begs the question, well, wait a minute. Did not Ham, wasn't he the one that committed this offense? Why did he get jumped over and it was Canaan? Which was a descendant of his that I think had not been born yet. Or maybe had been born or something. I'm grasping at stuff that's in the back of the brain, and I don't have it. Chronology is not where it ought to be. Either way, no, I don't believe that is a true depiction of that whole scene.
Yeah. Ken Ham addresses that in his little book, One Blood. Addresses it well.
Okay. Well, it's a little after, I like to get on them high spots where we're at a spot and then just, let's stop and go to prayer requests. Let's go to prayer requests. It's a good question, and I think it's one worthy to be entertained.